greetings and welcome back to the Aural Mess podcast. It's been a while since the last episode, but very happy today to have with me social worker, radio legend, musician, and my brother-in-law, Pete Salant. Hi, Pete.
Hello, Chad Sutton, and I guess I am all of those things, but you too are. I'm an IT guy, as we can see by those things hanging from the ceiling or on the wall behind you, a musician. And, I know secrets about you that very few people know, even you. So,
well, hopefully not many of those will come out in today's conversation.
I promise you none of them will.
Everybody should just leave a comment if they want a secret. Maybe I'll share something. I don't know. So I'm so glad you could join me. Thank you so much for taking the time on this kind of dreary Saturday.
Oh, but, trust me, it is beyond my pleasure, having known you for a years. It's, and having sat and talked to you for hours and hours and hours on end, it's nice to be able to, lay this down on a chip or whatever they call it. Used to be on tape and, see what comes out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, hey, why don't we jump right in? I would love to start with maybe your radio background. So,
sure.
Yeah.
I have a way to do that if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It all did. What was it on WKRP? It all started at a little 5,000 watt radio. Well, for me, it started in 1969. I was a sophomore in high school, and I was in a band, like so many people were in high school. The band was called Alexander Brandy. And yeah, I know. It was just us four guys. I played keyboards. Is that coming through?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so I have my piano organ, whatever it is, over here, and we had a drummer, a singer slash guitarist, and a lead guitarist, and we didn't sound too bad. Especially for high school bands. And we one night were doing what, high school kids do. I don't know. We were drinking, I think. And we were listening to the local radio station, which was WABC in New York. Well, I grew up in northern New Jersey, exit 172. That's how we explain where we're from.
That's right.
And we were listening to Cousin Brucey, the nighttime DJ, and he was doing a contest. Apparently, this was a contest I didn't know about, but it was one that had been going on for some time and was going to go on for some time. And it was called the Big Break contest. And the winner band would get an ABC Records recording contract. WABC, ABC Records, obviously it was all on the up and up and stuff. But, and bands were invited to send in a tape of what they sounded like a demo. And, I guess he eventually got about 25 or 30 bands. He played each one on the air on his nighttime radio show at like 9:00. When kids were supposed to be doing homework. And,
right.
Long story short, he liked what he heard, evidently, because we made it to the air. He played us, and it sounded good. So we did an old blues song, kind of a remake of an old blues song called Got My Mojo Running.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know who originally did it, but we cranked it up to a really, a rocker tempo, and ultimately we placed in the top 10.
Nice.
And got to play at Carnegie freaking Hall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Each band was given 5 minutes to rehearse on the stage, on the hallowed stage. Mind you, I'd never been in front of a Hammond B3 organ in my life. let alone the Leslie speaker and all that stuff. So, when the show started and it was our turn, we ended up having a false start because I screwed up and didn't know which stop to push up or down or whatever. But they gave us a chance to start over again, and we got through it. And needless to say, we didn't win the contest, but it was fun. A group of kids from our high school had gotten together and pooled their money and rented a commuter bus, a Rockland Coaches Red and Tan Line bus, to bring a bunch of the kids from Park Ridge High School into the city to see the show. And that was the highlight, having our friends see us perform at Carnegie Hall. And it was also my introduction into radio, because we had to originally go into the recording studio, the same place where who was the guy who did Monday Night Football? He was he used to be a lawyer, and I'm forgetting, I'm spacing out on his name, but that was his studio where he recorded his once a week network radio show. I'm going to say All Things Considered, but that's a different network. But got to see all the equipment, and it was magical. They played it back for us. It sounded nothing like what we thought we sounded like, because they had apparently equalized us and compressed us.
Sure.
And it was really, it really sounded outrageously good. Later on, the night they played the song on Cousin Brucey's show, I knew we were in the top 10, because when Brucey pointed to his engineer to play the tape, it was silence. And what that meant to me, and just with my minimal knowledge of radio, was that the program director, Rick Sklar, and Brucey had been listening to it back in Rick Sklar's office or something, and they didn't re-cue the tape. Normally the tape is you're supposed to let the tape cartridge go until it finishes, until it stops automatically. So either, if you forget to do that, you may be in a space of blank tape, and that's where we were. So Brucey had to vamp for a while until finally the tape cued and stopped, and Brucey said, "Okay, go," and they played us. But I already knew we were going to get a call because of that, and that was cooler than actually the whole rock scene and the playing the music, just the radio stuff. So I think it was at that point that I knew more or less exactly what I was going to be doing for a living, what I thought was the rest of my life. And that, it was really exciting. And, the following summer, my dad was ended up being the adult who, took care of this bunch of kids who were seniors in our high school, who went to our local radio station, which was in Hackensack, New Jersey. Everyone's heard Hackensack, courtesy of Billy Joel.
Yes.
I got to come with them, and I sat in the engineers' recording control room in shops in the New York market. You're not allowed to touch anything unless you belong to the engineers union. And if you're an announcer, you're not allowed to touch the engineering stuff, and you're not allowed to talk on the radio unless you belong to AFTRA, SAG-AFTRA now, the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. But I was just entranced. I was sitting there watching. I was more interested in what the engineer was doing than what the kids from my high school were talking about, with my dad sitting there. And afterwards, when on the ride home, which wasn't very long, I asked my dad, "Well, you think I can get a job there for the summer?" He said, "Well, you never know until you ask."
Right.
So following, that was on a weekend. The show was taped on a weekend. On Monday morning, I called the program director of the radio station, who also happened to be the guy who hosted that show that I was there for. And he said, well, what do you do? Why should I pay you to do something you don't have any experience? I said, I can write. I understand radio, and why don't you have me come in? I can write you a few commercials and see how they come out. And so he did. I took the bus, that same bus that our friends had taken to the Big Break contest, and I wrote, I guess, 2 or 3 commercials based on a fact sheet that he had given me, and he was kind of blown away. Apparently, he said, "Well, let's see, minimum wage is $2 an hour. This is 1970. Let me talk to our manager and sit tight." And the manager came down ultimately and talked to me, and they hired me for the summer. The normal production and copy director was out on medical leave for the summer, so they gave me the job.
Wow.
And I was
lucky.
Lucky. Holy, no, but man, I was like in hog heaven. I had a lunch hour, so during that lunch hour, I would sit in the control room watching the DJ do his show. The DJ had turntables so he could play his records. This was, mind you, a country station.
Right,
WJRZ, the mighty 97, countrypolitan music, whatever. And I was more interested in watching the technology, how he would start the record. And the DJ could also play the jingles. WJRZ, the mighty 97 from tape cartridges. And all the engineer did was ride levels on his board. And the jock could not adjust anything except play the records and play the tapes, the tape cartridges. So I would spend my lunch hours watching these guys do their thing. I was hooked.
Wow.
And
that's so cool.
And that's kind of the the end of the story from that perspective. It was I knew what my life was going to be about by then. And I was a year ahead of most kids because I had skipped first grade. So I was 16.
Yeah, okay.
And ready to go into my senior year of high school. And I went onward and became a DJ the following summer at another radio station. It's the station that Howard Stern ended up starting at in Briarcliff Manor, New York. It was just a little 800 watt FM station, WRNW. And
Pete, for my listeners, sorry to interrupt you, but what does that mean in the context of power and distance, right? So if it's an 800 watt FM station, what was the reach, from Briarcliff? Yeah, okay.
Not much. The stations in New York or Philadelphia or St. Louis or what, most of them are 50,000 watts. Either 50, depending on where you are in the country, the maximum power you can have is either 50 or 100,000 watts on FM. And so we had 800 watts. And it's not because they didn't want more power. That's all they could shoehorn in Briarcliff Manor, New York, and not interfere with other radio stations. So, right. It was a funny little radio station with not many commercials, didn't make much money, not too many. Most of the commercials were trade outs for the manager's lunches, which means they would trade commercial time in exchange for the guy's lunch at the same restaurant every day. And the station ended up being sold, and just at the right time when it was time for me to go to college. So that was that.
Okay.
Did I go to college? I don't know.
Well, let's pause there. That's the early days, sort of the inception story. But let's back up to when you were younger and just, musical influences and, how did you end up, taking instrument lessons? I'm assuming you took lessons, we all did when we were younger. But, give me some of the background of how you started playing music and some of your favorite things to listen to and maybe earliest memories of stuff that your parents played around the house. Because, I know your parents were big into music, right?
Yes, they were. And the music that we listened to around the house was mainly classical music. That's what my dad liked to, and my mom liked to listen to that too. So, but it was like the real thing: Beethoven, Bach, the real classical music, not classical light,
right,
or any of that. And my dad had built speakers into the wall. He had built a receiver and an amplifier from a kit. And that was his fun when he wasn't being a commercial artist for money. And when I was about 3 years old, I asked for a piano. My aunt, one of my aunts, had a pretty crappy piano, and I used to love. That's the first place I'd go when we went to visit them, was to sit down at the piano and play. And the first song I learned I taught myself was "The Old Gray Mare." Can you hear that?
No, I'm just getting like a thunking kind of sound.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, this thing turned itself off. And it sounded pretty much like that.
Right.
And
Shades of Bugs Bunny.
Pretty much, yes. Of course, who do you think? What do you think we watched at home? My sister and I. But anyway, I learned songs by ear. I began to get better and be able to play songs by ear. My parents got me piano lessons, which I took for the next 15 years. From a classically trained pianist, and that wasn't where I wanted to go, but it's how you learn to play properly. Billy Joel took classical piano lessons.
Sure.
And it was the right thing to do. So I did, and by the time I was 14 or 15, I quit lessons and began to play songs I was hearing on the radio by ear. I would go with my mother to the A&P supermarket or whatever, and I would say, I'm going to sit out in the car, listen to the radio while you go in and shop. And I'd listen, and this was New York, so I'd listen to WABC, WMCA. This is in the days of AM radio, and I'd hear the hits. So I was hearing at that time, 1964, 65, when I was 10 or 11, the Beatles, the Beach Boys, those songs. Learned to play, taught myself to play those tunes on the piano. In the meantime, my parents got me a refurbished upright piano, and it was a lot of fun. It didn't sound great, but it worked just fine. For my bar mitzvah, when I was 13, they bought me a Yamaha baby grand piano, which was I had the chance to, within reason, pick whatever piano I wanted. And we went to New York, and that was the piano to try pianos out. That was the piano that had the best feeling, the crispest sound, it just under my fingers, it just felt right. So that was the piano I had for the next X number of years. And I discovered that playing the piano is no different from playing the organ or any other instrument that is keyboard based. So that's how I was able to join a rock band. I guess I was listening mainly to the songs that were the hits, the top 20 of the week, because I was starting to listen to the radio. And these were bubblegummy type of tunes. This was 1970, 71. So sure, I could listen to some of the stuff that was out there at that time. But I really liked listening to the Beatles, the Stones, the stuff that we were hearing every hour on the radio.
Sure.
And later on I had an opportunity at that same WRNW radio station, which changed formats to rock. I had a chance to delve into that and to listen to and play some of the big, cuts from the major albums of the time, Steely Dan and so forth. But it still I wasn't able to practice my DJ skills using those, because when you play music like that on the radio, you introduce the song or you say what you're going to say, turn off your microphone, right, start the record, and you don't talk over the musical introduction of the song. God forbid, that would be sacrosanct. And what I really wanted to do was what Cousin Brucey was doing, which was talk over the intro of the song as the song started and stop just in the nick of time before the singers began to sing.
There's such an art to that. I never could get the hang of that when I used to practice or play, and as you know, maybe my listeners and viewers don't, but, I did have a very, very brief run as an on-air DJ in the late 80s in high school myself. And also in college, I had a college radio show on, I think it was Sunday mornings early. And yeah, like to be able to, it's timing. I guess there's science behind it too, right? There's a little bit of math involved, but just to have that rhythm and be able to sort of just flow into the song and know when to shut up and let the vocal kick in or the intro to be over, it's tough.
Some guys used to actually use a stopwatch, because the intro time would be maybe written on the record label,
right,
or if it was, or on a tape cartridge label or whatever. And we didn't really think much. Those of us who were in the business didn't think much of those kind of guys, because if you know the song, you know when to stop. You just know intrinsically exactly where to stop. Yeah. There's no need to be looking at a back timing clock. If you know the song, you know the song.
Right. And
I think you discovered that too when your sister, my wife, gave you the opportunity to do that and to play, and then later to actually do it on the radio. You discovered that your musical sensibilities helped you do that. That's one of the most important. The most important thing is to stop talking in time. You got to stop, because if you're still talking and they're singing, that's a major train wreck.
Yeah.
And there's no particular reason to continue to talk all the way up to the song intro. If you only have a few seconds of things to say, that's all you should say.
Yeah.
If you're if you're any good at what you're doing. So that was another thing that I learned relatively quickly. And the way you make your way up in the radio business is to get a job at the next bigger station in the next larger city. So I went from Mount Kisco. Well, first of all, I dropped out of college. That was just not for me. I was spending more time at the campus radio station than I was anywhere else. So I did that. I learned how to splice tape, how to edit tape, which is now something you no longer need to know how to do, because everything is digital. But I found a great deal of joy in being involved in that, so much so that I thought it was just basically bullshit to go to go to school, and I wasn't really learning anything, especially not in my communications classes, because these guys were light years behind reality, the professors. So, so I left school and I started working my way up the ranks of various radio stations, mainly in the Northeast, because there was a farm team. I worked in Manchester, New Hampshire, Providence, Rhode Island, and then as I continued to work up, I made it to New Haven, Connecticut, and to a pretty decent station there, where I got a pretty decent job doing the nighttime teen-oriented take requests on the air on the phone, and moving up, I gained the trust of the owners of the station. This is back in the day when people owned radio stations and not corporations. And so they trusted me when I gave them advice as to what to do. They owned an FM station, and FM was really beginning to come into its own. And I said, why don't we take this AM top 40 and put it on your FM station? Because the FM station was elevator music. I don't know if that means anything to any of your viewers or listeners, but it kind of like people would be listening to a cover version of a Beach Boys song played by the 101 Strings or whatever.
Lex Diaz-Avedo.
Well, yes, there you go. Well, you know this because the station you worked at had that format. I suggested, hey, let's go top 40 on the FM station, and they said, all right, well, we're not unaware of how AM is losing ground and FM is big. How fast could you make that change, Pete? And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, to do it right, it should take a few months. They said, how about 2 weeks? And all we basically had at that FM station, which was in a different location, was a studio. When we would play the music off of reel-to-reel tapes, just like you did in Atlantic City. But we couldn't, and our AM station was, all the music was on tape cartridges, but they were mono.
Right.
We were going to FM, which was stereo. We didn't have time to make hundreds of stereo tape cartridges, so we had to use the turntables and go back a few generations and of technology and play our music off of albums and 45s, which is what we did.
Wow.
And it was fun. Kept the same staff, and those guys were pros. They had already worked at radio stations that played vinyl, and they all knew what they were doing. Great guys, still friends with most of them, who were the ones who were still around with us.
Sure.
And that was basically that until one day I got a phone call from a guy who ran the NBC FM radio stations in New York City. Well, actually, he ran all of the NBC FM radio stations. There was one guy who ran the AM stations, one guy who ran the FM stations. And he said, my colleagues and I have been listening to your station in New Haven from out here on Long Island on the weekends when we come out to relax way out on the East End. And we'd like to talk to you about fixing our broken FM station in New York, which is called WYNY. Originally, it was WNBC FM. And it morphed into having a name of its own. I don't know where they got it from. It's NY is New York, I guess.
Right.
And I thought it was stupid, but it wasn't stupid for me to say yes to, I'll be there Monday morning at 10 a.m. And this gentleman, Walter Sabo, brought in his national program director from San Francisco. He brought in another guy. He brought in all of his sergeants at arms to talk to me. And we spent the entire day and part of the evening. I was being interviewed. And I got the job.
How did you feel?
Well, I couldn't believe it when I went to take the train home to Connecticut. I was looking up 102 stories in the sky at the Empire State Building, thinking, boy, in a few weeks, I'm going to be what I'm creating is going to be coming from the antenna on the very top of that building.
Wow, that's so cool.
It was beyond cool. And it was the pinnacle. It was everybody's dream. Anyone who was in radio and wanted to be a program director, which is like the person who's in charge of how the peanut butter tastes at the peanut butter factory.
Right.
And I was going to have a lot of autonomy. I had people who would give me ideas, and people above me and people who had been in the business for longer than I had, maybe, but they were all still full of crap. And I knew what I needed to do. And I was given a budget that was pretty amazing. We could spend $3 million a year on advertising and promotion.
Whoa.
And this is a radio station that had lost $600,000 the year before, and a great deal more the year before that, and a lot more the year before that. They just kept losing money because they were making bad decisions. And I just kind of knew. It's like if you play a musical instrument, when you're in the groove. I knew what I needed to do. I needed to go to the people who'd be listening to this radio station and ask them what they wanted to hear, what songs they wanted to hear, which we did in a kind of a scientific way, playing 10-second snippets of the hooks of songs for them in an auditorium, and they'd give us feedback using a knob on a device, I would then add my own ideas and make my own decisions as to which songs were the right ones to play. We would play maybe 5 or 6 current hits, 5 or 6 recent songs, and 200 or 300 recent, we call them oldies, but they were songs that had been hits during the past 10 years or so, which included back at that time the Turtles, it's ancient now, and you don't hear these on the radio anymore because the listeners have aged out.
Right.
But
sure.
At the time, it was the right thing to do, and I played 4 of those an hour, 2 current hits and 2 recent hits. We had the very best DJs that money could buy, several of whom were already there. I didn't have to hire new guys because these were guys I would have hired if I if I had needed to, and I had to let go of a couple of guys who wanted to talk too much. They were in love with their voice and all that, but it didn't take long before the station, which had been number 22 in the ratings, number 22 out of 25 stations in New York, FM stations in New York. I think it took us 3 or 4 months, and we were number one all of a sudden. Number one in adults, ages 25 to 54, which is what the advertisers were looking for. So, I mean, that was a no-brainer, because although I was only 26, I was at the beginning of that age group and knew what they wanted to hear, did my research, and was rewarded handsomely for doing the right thing and making this radio station sound like $1 million.
Wow.
And I'm still told to this day, 45, 50 years later, that no other radio station can touch what we did. We were very fortunate in that there was all of the top 40 hit stations were on AM at the time, and they were gravitating to FM, but we were it. So there was no other station playing the top hits other than us. So we could occupy a very broad spectrum of music, everything from Eye of the Tiger to, well, I mean, you name it. We could play it, softer stuff, louder, more strident music. Even if it sounded like a train wreck on the air, it still had appeal to the people who were listening.
Right.
And
how long did it take before the rest of the market sort of woke up and started to hustle to get that format in place on their FM stations? And when did you start seeing all the copycats jump
Thankfully, very good question, Chad. Thankfully, I don't think it took more than, well, it did take a couple of years before they started catching up to us. And a company based out of Cleveland, Mallrite, decided they were going to buy an elevator music station, WVNJ 100.3, licensed to Newark, but with its antenna on top of basically the same place we were, right in the Midtown Manhattan, at 1,400 feet above average terrain, and they bought the station and decided that all of a sudden the word got out they were going to do top 40. Until then, WYNY had deliberately been occupying that niche. That was us. That was, that and softer songs and never gonna let you go. I'm gonna, that kind of stuff. We were all kind of all over the road, but we had a purpose and we had a target audience, and it took a grand total of 3 years before we had a rating that didn't go up. The ratings were taken every 3 months, and it was 3 years before we had what we call a down book, a ratings that were not at the top of the heap. And it was at that time that I decided, wisely so, that I would leave and perhaps do this for stations in other places in the United States. Philadelphia was one and was my first. A station that is at 104.5. It was called Sunny, WSNI. And they wanted to sound just like WYNY. And of course, I didn't give them that. I gave them what was right for them. And then another station in Oklahoma City, a station in Salt Lake City, stations all over the place started to call me. And I never dreamed that I could be collecting checks from all of these stations for telling them what to do, giving them the right music to play, coming into their market 4 times a year for 2 or 3 days at a time to make sure that their DJs sounded the best they could. That the one big thing that was important to me, and it turns out it was important because it was there was a psychological basis to this. The station had to sound at least as good as the CD the music came from,
right?
And in fact, hopefully better. I was a sound hound. I was a guy with golden ears. I could tell when it sounded right. I had a little secret. We would speed up the music by just 2% to make that same song, when played on the competition, sound just sort of off, just wrong, and nobody could put their finger on it. In fact, most listeners weren't even aware we were doing it, but it would give us a competitive edge that made it possible for us to, get another win every time. We would win in the ratings, and these other stations didn't catch on. It was very easy to do.
That's fascinating. How did you ever come up with that? Like, what made you think, okay, let me speed up just ever so slightly, barely noticeably, but and that makes it sound more exciting.
Well,
like, where did you get the psychological basis for that?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that I am now a clinical social worker, which is a shrink. When radio began to consolidate and we began to lose radio stations to the corporations, and I ended up having to find different kind of work. So I went back to school, got a master's degree in clinical social work, and got a license to practice head shrinking, if you will. And I chose Virginia because that's where we wanted to live. Licenses are given out based on what state you live in.
Right.
And I knew that there were things that were important that no one could really put their finger on as far as radio was concerned. Right. So I didn't just give up radio like that. It took a while, and I continued to apply the things that I learned in social work school to radio, and speeding up the music was one thing. I knew it was too fast if anyone could actually identify that we were doing it. So we just didn't want them to know we were doing that. Right. I don't think the artists would have been particularly happy, and it was so subtle that it just didn't register with the listeners. Some of the other things we did were emphasizing the bass and the treble in the music by separating the bands into 3 or 4 bands: bass, mid-range, and highs and treble, and processing, meaning compressing the sounds in each of these bands separately, and then mixing them back together. So that
I remember you explaining this to me years ago. And I was going to ask you about it, sort of your secret weapon.
Yeah,
so yeah,
it's like remixing a song. This kind of the same thing that they do in the recording studios, but they don't do that. They do every instrument individually. Right. I couldn't at the time. We didn't have the technology to separate the instruments, like with using AI or whatever. Sure. But what we did have is the ability to separate the bands of audio into 0 to 200 hertz, 200 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, and then 5,000 and up. Like, let's say just 4, and you can go as high as you want. There's a company that took took the idea, I think, from me and ended up with 31 bands of sound. And that was a little overkill, but it did sound way better. And I had started doing this in New Haven with the AM station that made the AM station sound better than the FM. And then in New York, where we had all kinds of money to play with, and an engineer that I could assign to do nothing but build the gizmos that were required to do this stuff, because it wasn't available. You couldn't just buy a box off a shelf and have it do this. We had at WYNY, we had the very best sounding audio that a radio station could possibly have. And all the stations I worked with after that as a consultant actually sounded better, I think, than the original performance. In fact,
right.
Got a lot of compliments from engineering types and non-engineering types who thought the music that they were hearing out of the stations I was working with was better than the original.
Huh.
So I became a consultant. I worked for 20 years as a consultant. In the middle of that, I'll shrink this down a little bit. In the middle of that, I bought an AM radio station in New Haven, Connecticut. It was off the air, so it went for a song like cheap, like almost nothing. And it was, in fact, it had been off the air so long that the lights at the top of the tower were no longer flashing, which was illegal. And and it was not a high power station. It was not 50,000 watts. It was 1,000 watts, but that was enough to cover the market. And we played. There was an opening for oldies, and this is at the time, 1985. People who were at the time my age, anywhere from 30 to 60,
right?
And AM stereo had just come out, so we bought the gear that it took to do AM stereo, and I was also the engineer. I had help with that, but I would be working on those 4-band sound effect things, and we did everything we could to get out as far as we could, distance wise and clarity wise, and so forth. But then an FM station. This only took about 6 months. An FM station in our area decided they were going to play oldies, and of course, FM's better than AM, no matter how you work it.
Right.
And we were starting to actually make some money by selling commercials. The station had been on and off the air for years, but no one had made money with it until we began to. And unfortunately, we didn't make money for long, because along came a 50,000 watt FM station licensed to Hartford, but that covered our area, the entire state of Connecticut, called WDRC FM. And they all of a sudden came out of nowhere. And of course, their ratings were 100 times better than ours because they covered a larger area. They sounded better because they were FM. That was that. Sold the radio station for the shirt on my back, basically, and went back into consulting. After a while, I did whatever I had to do to make a living. I was creating TV commercials for radio stations. Nowadays, all it takes is an iPhone to do that. Anyone can do that. But in 1990, it required some software and the latest PC and music videos and all that stuff. But I made a decent living for about 10 years doing that, until I decided I needed to get back into the front lines of a radio station. There was no more consulting, because these big corporations had their own consultants built in. Didn't need a consultant, didn't need to hire an outside gun to come in and fix, because if it was broken, they could fix it themselves, or at least so they thought. So I took a job in Hartford for a country station. And you know that country is my least favorite type of music in the entire world. But I also knew that it was a job. It was a job that happened to pay better than I had even ever expected. And at the time, I was given an enormous amount of flexibility to program it myself. The manager gave me lots of leeway. And for 2 years, the ratings grew and grew and grew. I was paid in part based on the ratings and how fast they grew and where they were in the mostly we were looking for men and women ages 40 to 60 or 35 to 40, whatever. And I got, every time we were number one, I got a $25,000 bonus.
Cool.
That was more than I was making from my salary. Not a bad gig. But then and the company that owned this was Clear Channel. Mm-hmm. Clear Channel made some changes 2 years in to my job. They got rid of the manager who'd hired me. They centralized control of the playlist, what songs would be played. I knew that the key to winning in the Hartford and New Haven, Connecticut market was to kind of be a montage of both country and rock. And they didn't want me to do that. They just wanted me to play Howdy, Hi-Yo, whatever the hell. And that was the end of Connecticut Country 92.5. They let me go after another year or so of me doing exactly what I was told to do. I was also at a certain age that, they deny it, of course, but I was 55 at the time, and that's the time when someone turns 55, that's too old to be the program director.
Right, sure.
I even offered to take a pay cut, a major pay cut. I offered to do anything it took to keep the job. That's not what they wanted. So it was time for Plan B. They did give me a handsome payout because I had a contract. So they paid me for a year. And during that time, I came to the realization that I had to go back to freaking college, which I did. I had never finished. I had never gotten my bachelor's degree.
Right.
So I went to Southern Connecticut State University and finished the education I never had finished at Boston University 37 years before that. And I was able to finish that in a year. I won't say exactly what I did, but I had some very cooperative professors and deans who helped me along the way. I was the oldest guy there, everyone else was 22. So right. I finished and got my bachelor's in a year, and then I decided I would go to Fordham University, which had an excellent clinical social work department. And I only had to go to school twice a week. So it wasn't a big deal. Go to New York and take some courses. They were not doing any virtual stuff. It was all right in the classroom. And I got a 2-year master's in 1 year.
Wow.
Except for one little thing, I couldn't do the math, and what was the course that they were requiring? It was an advanced math course. I got a lot of help from the professor, and I mean a lot of help, like open book tests, and I was allowed to take the answers home with me. He just wanted me to pass.
Right.
Tremendous guy. I love him. I mean, I'll never forget him. And after that, I had to work for, was it 2 years or 3 years, under supervision in order to get my license. So I did that and got my license, scored 100 on the test.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And got my license in here in Virginia to be able to see patients. And I, had an office. Your sister, my wife, and I shared a waiting room, and we had 2 little offices off of there. And for 4 years, we did that. We worked separately together. She had beat me to the. She knew that radio was not going to be where it was at, and she had been in radio as well. So she had gone and gotten her doctorate in clinical psychology way ahead of me. In fact, in 2006, it was almost 10 years ahead of me. And she was able to command higher reimbursement rates from the insurance companies and so forth. And thank goodness for that. And it was the fact that she went from radio to mental health that I got the idea to do so, and have been doing it ever since. And when was it March 2020 that came around, and it was no longer really smart to be seeing people in person. We got our Zoom subscriptions with all of the add-ons that you needed in order to make it legal to make it legal to see people and continue to have to be how can I say it?
It's like HIPAA compliance.
Yeah, but what is HIPAA? But it is. Yes, to be HIPAA compliant. It was just basically paying an extra couple of $100 a year to ensure that everything that was said during sessions was just between the patient and me. And I've been doing that ever since. When I turned 70 earlier this year, I started cutting back on the number of hours that I was working, because it was starting to, I wouldn't say I was burning out, but it was starting to become more of the same. Yeah. And Stacy, your sister, also finding the same thing. So she found another niche to enter. She is interviewing. She's interviewing people who have either recently left the military or who are active military, to assess whether they should be getting special treatment or extra money for things they went through, that like PTSD and stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm not allowed to do that because I don't have a doctorate, and she is. So I do the bookkeeping and the IT, and I have my own. I'm continuing with my own small clientele. My census is I'm working 3 days a week, and I'm seeing 7 or 8 people a week, and a few of them I've been seeing for 6 or 7 years. And I can continue to do this as long as I can sit down.
All right.
So, and the music continues to be my fun, and I don't play enough, and I should.
Yeah, neither do I.
But one thing I don't do is listen to the radio anymore. There's absolutely nothing on the radio that's attracting me other than if I happen to be in the car at the right time. National Public Radio's morning show and afternoon show can have their interesting moments.
Sure.
And I'm still kind of interested in some of the things about old radio, like jingles, like station jingles, singing the call letters. And there's even a guy who once a week does a 3-hour radio show about jingles because he's been the guy who creates most of the jingles since 1976, and he's still doing it today. So I listened to his show on an internet radio station that they gave him 3 hours a week to play with. So that's lots of fun. Yeah. And I stay in touch with old friends from radio. Every Friday at 9:30, we have a Zoom meetup for an hour and a half. And once a year, we get together in person in Connecticut and have some fun. And that's the limit. That's all I do in radio. I love what radio was, but I can't stand what radio is because it's not the same. Agreed. It's just not. It doesn't even resemble what I did because we're not allowed to make decisions. They're made centrally.
Yeah. I hardly ever listen to the radio anymore. There's maybe 3 stations that I would tune into, and I can probably name them. One's WBGO.
The jazz station.
It's the jazz station. They're still around, and I think they're still independent. There's FMU, and I was a fan of their morning show during my morning commute once in a while because they were just playing like a really eclectic mix of like alternative college radio type music, but also peppering in some older stuff and some new things. And they would have theme shows, so they would ask people on Twitter to submit songs for, hey, the theme of the day is, spaghetti and meatballs, or, something silly, and people would just submit songs that had something to do with the theme. And the only other one I listen to, and it's because of the traffic updates, is 1010 Wins, which is now on FM on, I think, 92.3. So... Yeah, so those are my 3 presets in my car, and I don't care for any other stations.
You ever listen to Q104.3, the classic rock station? It's too repetitive, maybe?
Yeah, probably, yeah. And they play the hits, I mean, back in the day, FM and album rock stations were great because you would hear a deep cut, or something that you really wanted to listen to, but now it's just the same,
There is,
hits.
there's absolutely... No, there's nothing left that is edgy or current. If you want to discover new music, you have to find new ways to do it. Right. So, I have a couple of friends who work there, and they're very lucky to be working into their 70s. But they are the exception. They are great. They are entertaining. And they are able to rise above the repetitious music and engage the listener in something, a little bit more. But that and the stations you mentioned is all there is to listen to in the New York area. So,
right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I seem to have usurped all of the time here, but I guess there was a lot to talk about, at least for me to talk about.
Yeah, no, there was. This was great. I'm glad we were able to capture sort of this condensed version of the history. And, I continue to be fascinated by, what you did. And I think you were, somewhat of a pioneer in radio. So I think it's really great for my audience to be able to get that story. And I know that you were just recently on another YouTube channel. So I will post a link to that video in the comments. I mean, in the show notes as well, because I think you go a little bit bit deeper into some of the actual, radio industry stuff, right? So for anybody who wants to hear more, you could check that video out.
Right. And there's another video. We don't need to link, but there's a guy who did parody Christmas songs, Bob Rivers.
Oh, sure.
He and I worked together in New Haven in 1976.
I didn't know that.
At WAVZ in New Haven, and we've been friends ever since. He's currently fighting a really difficult cancer and has been for a number of years. But Stacy and I recently had a chance to see him. It was a couple of years ago by now, but he's hopefully going to live. But we're hoping so. But he's my most famous friend because he made a lot of money and put out. I'm thinking it's 8 or 9 gold records.
Yeah, I was going to say there are a bunch of those. I remember.
Yeah, and there's I guess his biggest hit was called "Walking Around in Women's Underwear," which his son, who is a Hollywood producer, recently put to video, and it's pretty neat. Yeah. So anyway, he's my most famous friend, and I count a lot of, I guess, those of us who took pride in our work and took it seriously, kind of hung together for life, and that's really been the way it is. And yeah, when I think about it, yes, I invented some of the things that are commonplace now in radio, and I'm proud of having done that. And thank you for noticing.
Yeah, of course.
And I think the world of you, and I love you, Chad. And I know that there's a musician in you, and someday I hope you get back to it.
Yeah. Oh, I will. I've been noodling here and there, so just a matter of time before I put more energy into it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for talking to me today. It's been great.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on again. I really appreciate you being here, and I've really enjoyed the 2 episodes that I've done with Cal, your daughter, and we have another one potentially in the works. So hopefully that'll come out pretty soon.
Fantastic! Yeah, you guys really click.
Yeah.
It's so nice to see.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Chad.
All right, great. Thanks, Pete. Love you too, and talk to you soon. All right.